August 2nd, 216 BC. By sunset, an estimated 50,000 Roman soldiers lay dead on a single battlefield. It was a suffocating, close-quarters slaughter that practically erased the largest military force Rome had ever fielded. This happened near the Aufidus River, on a wide, featureless plain. The Carthaginian general, Hannibal Barca, intentionally lured the Roman army to this exact, flat terrain to execute a trap. Here is how he set it up. Rather than drawing a straight line, Hannibal pushed his lighter Iberian and Gallic infantry forward, creating a convex bow shape. He hit his heavily armed African infantry far back on the extreme left and right flanks. The Romans took the bait. They charged the bowed center, and Hannibal's front line slowly retreated. The Romans pressed deeper and deeper, drawing themselves into a pocket. Then Hannibal's heavy infantry on the edges clamped shut, pivoting inward to strike the Roman flanks. At the exact same time, the Carthaginian cavalry easily dispatched the Roman horsemen. Sweeping around the perimeter of the battlefield, they returned to crash into the rear of the Roman infantry, sealing the trap. Hannibal completely surrounded and annihilated a force much larger than his own. It is considered a flawless tactical masterpiece. Yet, despite executing this perfect battle, he lost the war. In the immediate aftermath of Cannae, Rome was shattered. They lost tens of thousands of veteran soldiers, nearly all of their active field armies, and a huge swath of their political leadership, including a sitting consul. Rome's empire was bleeding out, but they didn't surrender. Ultimately, Rome defeated Hannibal, won the Second Punic War, and eventually erased Carthage from the map entirely. This reveals a harsh reality about armed conflict. Winning the fight directly in front of you means almost nothing if you lack the underlying strategic depth to sustain the war. So, how exactly does an empire endure the total destruction of its military to defeat an undisputed tactical genius? Hannibal could not simply march on Rome after his victory at Cannae. He lacked the heavy siege equipment required to breach its walls, and his supply lines stretching back through hostile territory were incredibly thin. Instead, his plan relied on flipping Rome's soci, their allied states in Italy, to his side. But Rome had spent centuries forging deals that exchanged military protection for loyalty. Those political bonds proved highly rigid, and the mass defection Hannibal needed never fully materialized. Meanwhile, the Roman dictator Fabius Maximus implemented a highly controversial policy. He ordered his remaining commanders to explicitly refuse any pitched, open-field battles with Hannibal. This tactic, known as the Fabian Delay, used Rome's massive demographic reserves to constantly shadow and harass the Carthaginian army. They cut off supply foragers and contained Hannibal's movements, intentionally denying him yet another chance to use his battlefield traps. By actively avoiding direct combat, Rome neutralized Hannibal's specific genius and dragged the conflict into a war of grand strategy. That strategic shift was fully realized by the Roman general Scipio Africanus. He understood that fighting Hannibal in Italy was playing into the enemy's hands. He needed to strike at Carthage's foundations. Scipio launched a major campaign into Spain. By conquering the Iberian Peninsula, he systematically severed the primary source of wealth and mercenary reinforcements that Hannibal relied on to keep his Italian campaign alive. This topographical map shows Carthage's harbor. The empire relied entirely on its maritime dominance to generate revenue. Constructing these circular and rectangular harbors required excavating 120,000 cubic meters of earth, the economic engine of their society. By dismantling their external wealth and directly threatening this economic core, Scipio panicked the Carthaginian elite. They immediately recalled Hannibal to defend the homeland, proving that grand strategy dictates exactly where and when the actual fighting happens. Hannibal was forced to abandon his Italian campaign. He returned to North Africa, stepping foot on his homeland for the first time since he was 9 years old. When he finally met Scipio at the Battle of Zama, Hannibal's army was severely compromised. Scipio's earlier victories across Spain and Africa meant Hannibal fought without his veteran Iberian infantry and without his elite Numidian cavalry. He had to face highly disciplined, heavily armed, and deeply supplied Roman legions, with a patched-together force of raw recruits and whatever mercenaries he had left. Scipio had spent years systematically dismantling his opponent's resources. By the time they finally clashed, Hannibal had effectively lost the battle before the first sword was even swung. The Carthaginian army was utterly routed. Rome imposed a treaty that gutted their military and economy, and just a few decades later, the city of Carthage was razed to the ground. Today, military academies study Hannibal's maneuvers at Cannae with deep reverence, but that perfect victory is permanently tethered to the grim reality of his total defeat. Winning a battle requires outsmarting your enemy on the field. Winning a war requires building an unbreakable system that out-resources, out-plans, and outlasts them on the map.